From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. Past episodes of this podcast have centered on the difficult and heartbreaking challenges we face around the issue of homelessness in America. In this conversation, we'll meet someone taking a creative and inspiring approach to providing shelter and manufacturing the shelters themselves. Amy King is the founder and CEO of Pallet, a public benefit corporation working to end unsheltered homelessness and give people fair chance access to employment through comprehensive work-first workforce development programming. Pallet has deployed more than 100 villages across 85 U.S. cities. Amy also co-founded Weld Seattle, a nonprofit that equips individuals impacted by the justice system with housing, employment, and other resources conducive to successful reintegration back into society. Before we move on to our interview, please know that we had some challenges with Amy's audio, and it will be a little bit hard to understand at times. I apologize for that, but I can assure you, you'll appreciate what she has to say, and hanging in there with our technical difficulties will be well worth your effort. With that, I hope you enjoy this blue sky conversation with Amy King as much as I did. Amy King, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill. Great to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I've been fascinated learning more about your background and your work, and it's hard to even know where to start with you because you've done so many amazing things and continue to. But I'd like to start where I believe your career began in child psychology. So I'd love to hear sort of what drew you to child psychology, and then I suppose eventually what drew you into something else. So how'd you get interested in child psychology?
Yeah, so I studied psychology in college, as well as human sciences and development. I originally wanted to be a doctor, but wasn't smart enough to get into medical school. So went into the psychology side and just totally fell in love with it. And then as I learned more and did more psychology with kids, I realized how the family unit and parents really impacted and influenced the success of those children. And I worked with a lot of kids who came from troubled homes and troubled backgrounds, with parents that were struggling with addiction, incarceration, poverty, all kinds of things. And so kind of got interested in that dynamic of how those things influence family systems, children, parents. Got into the business side of healthcare just out of a necessity I worked in surgical practices and psychology and all of that. At Harvard Medical Center, which is the level 1 trauma center here in Seattle area. And then morphed from there into business with my husband. So it's kind of went all the way through there, but it's really, I'm interested in people, right? And kind of how we become what we become and how our experiences influence.
Amazing. And it seems you're interested in people too, who are struggling on the margins, disadvantaged in various ways. If I have it right, you founded Pallet in 2016. And one of the events I think that led you on this path was Hurricane Katrina, and it's an image that I think if any of us were around and remember all that's hard to get out of our heads, is people sheltered in a football stadium that was leaking. Was that one of those sort of triggering events for you that got you thinking about maybe how you could address the issue of both sort of disaster relief and then also general homelessness?
Yeah, so there's two parts to sort of the origin stories of Pallet. One is that, and I'll talk about a little more about that in a second. But prior to that, my husband started a construction company. My husband's a builder, and he started a construction company in 2014 called Square Peg Construction. He asked me to come help him set up the business side of Square Peg, which I agreed to do. And I thought I would do that temporarily and then go back to healthcare because I was like, I like being married to you. I don't know if we should work together. We're still married. We've been married for 23 years. And we actually loved working together. And it turned out that we really enjoyed entrepreneurship together as a couple. And so we very much in that company by accident started employing people coming out of the justice system. And the vast majority of those folks had experienced homelessness, and homelessness was really on the rise at that time. And then the public narrative was people don't want help. That's still a narrative today, but much less predominant today than it was then. And so we asked our folks who worked with us who had experienced homelessness, is this right? Why would people say that? And we're like, no, people just don't want what we offer, which is congregate shelter, because it's traumatizing. And here's all the reasons why. As of someone who had studied psychology and worked in psychology, that made sense to me. I had just put the pieces together. And so we said, okay, what can we do with the skills that we have of construction and knowledge of structures? How can we take that knowledge and pair it with what you know from experience and build something that will actually help move people out of homelessness? And so that was actually the original precipitating thing for Pallet. But in Hurricane Katrina back in the day, my husband and I were sort of watching what was going on. And my husband, he was the one as a voter who was like, in the richest country in the world, we shove a bunch of people to the stadium and we have issues with crime and safety and health. And how is this possible that we can't come up with like a rapid construction product where people can have their own space? So he's sort of literally on a cocktail napkin floating in the pool on a vacation that we were on, like sketched out the first pallet shelter and was like, couldn't we make these? Like, what can we make them out of? And so we had this whole conversation with another couple that we were on a trip with. And then he pulled that out of his pocket like 5 years later and was like, we're talking about this homelessness thing. I designed this thing. Could we make this? My dad's an engineer. So we gave it to my dad and we were like, can you build this? Can you make it lightweight, rapid deployment, cheap? And he was like, yeah, let's do that. And that's how we started.
Amazing. And you said originally you were hiring people, many of them have been in the criminal justice system by necessity. So as I understand it, there was basically just a shortage of workers at the time when you started. So you happened to hire these folks and then you realized they were great employees. They were loyal. They did a good job and they needed a break. So that became part of sort of your model going forward. And let's dig into Pallet a little bit because I've had a chance to check it out and understand what you do. The first thing that might surprise people when they hear what you're doing, some people would assume this is a nonprofit, but you are, and what is the term? A
public benefit corporation.
Public benefit. So can you talk about what that means and why you went that path, not a nonprofit, but a for-profit?
Yeah, for sure. So Pallet's a public benefit corporation, or people also refer to it as a social enterprise. So the concept there is a for-profit entity that utilizes its profits first and foremost for expansion and scaling of its mission. So we have a dual mission. One is workforce development, introducing more people to the construction trades because we don't have enough people in that industry to build the housing that we need. And the second piece of that is the byproduct of that mission, which is the shelters to provide safety and security and stabilization to people who are displaced. So basically what that means is we can be profitable as a company. We can also draw different funding sources. So nonprofits are often experiencing scarcity. There's competition within the marketplace for donors and things like that. We were concerned that this model wouldn't be scalable or sustainable as a nonprofit. And so we decided to go the for-profit route to recruit social impact investors, which we have, some very wonderful ones, and then to help us scale. And then in addition to that, we felt like if this company can become profitable, we can then in turn employ more people, expand the workforce mission, and that over time becomes sustainable.
Right. And thinking about it, sitting where we are today, where a lot of government funding is dried up and there are a lot of nonprofits who are really back on their heels because out of nowhere, or maybe it was foreseeable, but all of a sudden there's a big funding source that's cut. You don't face that. And in terms of social impact investors, I will put in a plug for Gratitude Railroad and my friend Howard Fisher, who's the one who introduced us. And knowing that you have investors like that, not only they bring more than just money, I assume. They bring a lot of expertise, a lot of passion, and a real desire not just to make a return, but first and foremost to have a real positive impact. Is that a fair way to describe that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have a whole collection of social impact investors who definitely bring a lot more than a check. So, I mean, we have a number. Gratitude is an amazing one. Autodesk Foundation is an amazing one. RK Foundation, City Ventures from Citibank, DBL Partners. I mean, we have some great organizations in the social impact space a long time. So it's what I would categorize as capital. They understand that scaling these systems takes time. So there's not a return or a demand for return quickly, which is great because that allows us to scale intentionally with social systems in mind. And then they bring a lot of like network connections, understanding of systemic change and how that happens, government interaction. Those things are all essential ecosystem parts that we need help with in order to succeed in fulfilling our mission.
Amy King studied psychology in college and realized she had an intense interest in people. It was later during Hurricane Katrina when she and her husband, who owned his own construction company, saw the terrible conditions of the storm survivors and thought that as builders, why couldn't they figure out a way to build structures that would help shelter people who are challenged with homelessness outside of natural disasters? While creating Pallet, Amy was very thoughtful about what type of corporate entity it should be and settled on the public benefit corporation model. She went on to raise capital from impact investors, including one founded by my friends Howard Fisher and Eric Jacobson, called Gratitude Railroad. And she's been growing this business and its positive social impact ever since. For more on that, let's get back to our conversation. So let's talk about the pallet structures themselves. These are, I'll describe it very simplistically and you can get into a little more detail. From my vantage point, what I've seen, they're small. They're assembled incredibly quickly, 30 to 60 minutes. The doors lock. So talk a little bit more about the structures themselves. And then a question I have is, where are you able to place these? If you're trying to, so let's say there's a community that's got a homeless issue that they're trying to address with shelter. How do you get this going? How do you find the places to put them? It's a very open-ended question, but tell us more just about the pallets themselves.
Yeah, so the structures themselves are panelized, not modular, to make them easier to get in for last mile logistics into locations and get them set up faster. They don't require any heavy machinery, cranes, or fancy forklifts or anything like that. They're made of a lightweight organic material that's mold, mildew, and rot resistant. Can be set up in an hour, can be hosed off between users. So for public health and safety issues, we can clean them. They won't mold. They don't, we allow pets and things like that. If your pet has an incident in a unit, we can literally just hose it out. You don't have to worry about it smelling like pee later, that kind of thing, right? So we want these things to be super durable and easy to maintain because they do take a lot of wear and tear in the environment that we use them in. So they set up in an hour. They have bed, desk, shelves, heat, air conditioning, windows. We've evolved the design over time with feedback from end users and city partners and service provider partners. So our legacy S1 product, we improved upon in 2023 and launched a new S2 product line. We'll be launching an S3 probably next year or the year after. So we're just constantly learning new innovative construction materials and what end users want and need. And people evolve, so needs evolve. And so we're just constantly changing and iterating the product. How we deploy it is almost entirely in partnership with cities. So we work directly with mayors, city councils, county supervisors, and commissioners, and sometimes states. We have a unique partnership with Zillow. Rich and Sarah Barton are investors in Pallet as well, but we have a partnership with Zillow where we can leverage their data to identify unutilized land that's sitting vacant. And then we work with cities to gain access to that land. Most of the time, they already own it. They may or may not know that they own that land. We're mostly working with publicly held properties, but sometimes we use privately held and they're leased back to a city we're not in the business of being landowners or real estate developers. The idea here is, how do we take an asset that you already have access to or that's sitting unutilized, turn it into quickly so you can address of your constituents and people that are displaced in your community. And then the product literally sits on the ground. You don't have to put foundations or do any expensive construction. We can take it down and go away and return the property back to its original state just as quickly as we turn it into a shelter village. So the idea here is that property can then in the future be used for permanent housing development, economic development, whatever it is it was originally intended for.
So does the municipality, do they pay you? Do they own that structure? What's the business arrangement? You're a for-profit. So how does that work?
Yeah, so it's a retail model. So we sell the product to them. The sale of that product then funds our workforce model. So that's the business model. We are now launching to a leasing model as well, where we can lease communities for things like disaster response, World Cup, like folks coming in population, workforce, mobile workforce populations, people who are moving around and need places to stay and hotels aren't available, that kind of thing. So it allows us to diversify our market presence as well, which helps us expand the business, create more jobs. But yeah, typically we're working with.
Amazing. And so I saw a video on your website, and there was a gentleman, his name was Matthew, I believe. One of the things that came through to me there that I wouldn't have thought of is he's a drug dependent guy, substance abuse disorder, clearly had been homeless for, I think he said, as long as I can remember, something like that. And he's now, or at the time of this video, he was in a pallet shelter. And one of the things he said was, this took me out of the environment where there were drugs everywhere. So, and the way he said, and now I've got hope that I can actually get off these because I'm not basically swimming in it all day. I've got a roof over my head and a door I can lock. Can you talk about that and the ways that this is not just, it seems to me, these are not just a little Band-Aid on a problem. This is a path towards a chain of events that can really pull people out of this awful cycle of homelessness. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be really clear, Pallet doesn't run our site. We're not responsible for services. However, we do contractually obligate our municipal partners to sign a service agreement with a local service provider. And so we partner with over 80 distinct service providers across the country who are providing wraparound care and support at these sites, especially as they relate to homelessness, but for disaster response as well. There's usually a service provider on site that's helping the people who live there figure out what's next. So pallet villages are not a substitute for permanent housing. This is a temporary solution. And a lot of people do refer to what we do as a Band-Aid. But if you ever go to a pallet site, what you'll find is there's full-time case managers, there's security for the people who live there. So people who live unsheltered in uninhabitable environments like encampments, there's a lot of predatory behavior that's happening, right? These are vulnerable folks. People are coming in, they're selling drugs, there's prostitution, all kinds of things that are happening. Whether the people want that or are participating willingly in that or not is a separate topic. But the point is, we can move people into what we call a managed care environment where there's access to medical care, there's support for case management, for mental health, for substance use, for housing placement. People can engage after they've stabilized enough to be able to receive those services. And so when you're living in crisis on the streets and you're just constantly trying to survive and you're not sure where your next meal is coming from or where you're sleeping tomorrow night, you don't have enough mental clarity and stability to receive services that then work. Also, service providers have a hard time finding people because they're moving around, right? So this model allows us to place someone in a unit that's theirs for as long as they need it. Average length of stay at pallet sites is 6 to 9 months right now. So they have a place that's theirs with a locking door, and they can store their things, they can bring their pet, they can stay with their partner if they want to, which you can't do any of those things at a congregate site. So during the day, you can engage with services, you can get a job, you can, whatever's next for you, you can do that comfortably, knowing that your things aren't going to walk away, your pet's not in trouble, your partner's taken care of. You can go and engage with those things. And then we start to see people moving forward. And so we've seen very great progress at our site for people moving from a life of crisis and instability to like, what's next? How do we move forward?
It's a great model too, I would think, because this idea of working with the local service providers makes a ton of sense because they know the marketplace. In a lot of cases, I'm friendly with someone who runs a service in Maine, and he knows these people who are on the streets. They see them in the food pantry, and they've it's often the sort of recidivists that they see them coming, and they get back on their feet, and then they're back. So it seems to me, not only does it allow you to have a smaller overhead as a business, but you've got the right people in market. These pallet shelters really are simple and brilliantly designed. Not only can they be constructed quickly, but once they're assembled, they provide dignity and safety for the people temporarily housed in them. I was particularly interested in Amy and Pallet's partnership with another for-profit entity, Zillow, where they work together to identify unused public land. And once a municipality allows these spaces to be used for temporary shelter, they also step in to provide wraparound services for tenants. These structures can also have a wide range of uses, and in addition to putting roofs over the heads of the unhoused, they can be utilized during disaster relief or even during one-time events like World Cup soccer. Amazing. Now, back to my blue sky conversation with Amy King. My understanding is you're in many different places in the country. You've even started in Canada. Where you're based in Seattle? Are you mostly in the Pacific Northwest? Are you starting to get intake all over the country? How's that going?
Yeah, we're all over the place. So our headquarters is here in Washington State. I get this question all the time. Seattle has the third highest rate of homelessness in the country. And people are like, what are you doing in Seattle? And it turns out you can't be an evangelist in your own backyard. So we don't do a lot in Seattle for a number of political reasons. But we have 148 active sites in 133 U.S. cities. We're in 29 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. So we have a really broad reach. I will say the majority of our sites are concentrated on the West Coast, and we're starting to see more demand all across the country because homelessness is a problem everywhere.
Amazing. And you have, I'm always taken with people who do your kind of work because it's so daunting and so challenging, and some of these problems seem so intractable. But you have been quoted saying that your goal is to help contribute to the eradication of homelessness. You've been at this for a fair amount of time, 10 years. As you sit here today, are you more or less hopeful about that goal? Do you feel like, and you can be honest, either way, do you feel better about that than you did when you started? Or do you look at it and say, oh my gosh, just, it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back? How do you feel about progress towards that goal?
Yeah, a great question. I will say it's a controversial answer, which is things are getting harder and they're about to get better still because of changes from the current administration and just generally politically around how we address homelessness. If I remember anything from my childhood, my mother used to always tell me things always get worse before they get better. And that's true. That's always been true in my life. I do believe that the changes that are coming, not just from this administration, but from society at large around homelessness, are going to drive significant change and get us to that. So I do have hope that we're going to get to the goal. What's needed that we've never done before is really providing a sufficient amount of services to address the root cause issues that people have that lead them to homelessness and perpetuate their homelessness cycles. We have a very robust homeless industrial complex in this country. Seattle is one of the worst cities in the country for that. I talk about it very openly. Most people are not willing to talk about it. It's real, it's alive, it's thriving off of perpetuating cycles of poverty and addiction. And being able to step into the space and say, which people are doing now, and say, status quo isn't working. We must do something different. We must embrace innovation. We must provide sufficient services. That's what we're going to need to really change the bottom line here and get us closer to functional zero. There will always be some level of homelessness in this and every country, but getting to functional zero means minimizing that number and making sure that when people are homeless, they have a place they can go where they can get the services they need to then move forward back towards self-sufficiency. What we've done in this country for decades, people's choices and bad behavior, not healthy, not safe, not compassionate. And now we're starting to talk about accountability and structure for people who need it. What's missing is the availability of beds and service providers to provide the spaces and services that we need. So there will be a painful point here where we don't have sufficient beds and we don't have sufficient service provider capacity. My hope is that the public frustration with the issue has finally grown to the point that we're all acknowledging this for what it is, and we're willing to move forward with effective strategies and invest in those in the long term. And that, I believe, will end homelessness completely.
Incredible. Well, you have a very, for someone who's probably very much nose down in growing a business, you have a very wide scope and understanding of the issue. Do you spend a fair amount of your time on sort of legislative issues, on government issues, outside of trying to grow the business? I imagine there are incredible demands on your time, but is that something that you put a fair amount of effort into?
Yeah, I would say 60 to 70% of my job, my day job, is politics, which if you had asked me, like, I'm not a political person. I know nothing about politics. I didn't study it. I didn't have any interest or desire to go into this space. But in order to do what we do and deal in social systems change, you kind of have to get into that. So I did a crash course in politics through this business. And I enjoy it more than I thought I would. It's challenging. And I think the thing I like the most about it is that as administrations change federally, locally, at all levels, I've really learned how to find common ground with whoever's there. Because if you're going to change social systems, it's not about Democrat or Republican. It's not about what side of the aisle you're on. It's about finding common ground. It's about working with who's there and helping them understand the need, but also working within their understanding and worldview to get the job done. So I have spent my whole life, and I'll keep saying, I will work with whoever is there to get people housed. That's my ultimate goal. It might look different from one administration to the next, but the goal is the same, and the outcomes should be the same. And that's where the focus has been lacking in our country, is on outcomes, and that shift is starting to.
Amazing. Well, another use of the pallet shelters is disaster relief. And as I was getting ready for this interview, just to date this, there's a terrible hurricane bearing down on Jamaica, and we are seeing more fires and displacement. And, we've always had a lot of these issues. Some of them are getting worse. Can you talk about the role that you can play in disaster relief, that you have played and that you hope to maybe do more of going forward?
Yeah, for sure. So disaster relief is a complicated, also highly politicized space, something I did not know until I started to get into it.
You'd think if there's something that's not political, it's disaster relief.
Turns out it's not. Yeah, everything is political. That's what I've learned. So we have been trying to partner with FEMA for 8 years, very unsuccessfully. It's a pretty large, kind of antiquated organization that sort of is set in their ways of doing things and in their contracts. So kind of breaking in to that mold and to do something innovative is like going. There is some change happening right now with this administration, good and bad. But I do think we are going to make some progress here. We had our first disaster deployment last year in response to Hurricane Helene and Milton. We set up a site in Pasco County, Florida, for people who were displaced there. We were able to get the site up in 10 days. Everybody had their own space, which was great. I think there are some things we learned about the product itself and its use case for that. And certain populations, they want things that the product doesn't have, like an in-unit bathroom. Our homelessness sites, we don't include a bathroom for service reasons. I'm happy to talk more about it if you still. In disaster is a little different. So we're working on a product iteration that is better for disaster, that has some modularity to it. You can add bathrooms and kitchens, things like that. That should be coming in the next year or so, I hope, and that's the goal. But I think this idea of non-congregate shelter for disaster is a couple years behind the shift from non-congregate shelter and homelessness, right? So all the same reasons why people experiencing homelessness don't want to go to congregate shelter are the same reasons why people stay in their home when it's unsafe and it shouldn't. It's because they don't want to go to a congregate shelter because they're afraid of safety, health issues, all of that. Or they don't leave their pet at home, or it's all the same, different issues, different populations, same trauma, right? So we're starting to get some understanding with the disaster community that congregate shelters are no longer useful. We're setting up shelters all across this country for tens of millions of dollars a lot of times that get like 30% utilization. What a waste of taxpayer dollars. So we're starting to get some data back around that, using that to help communities understand how they can be more efficient. And the great thing about our model and our product is this is versatile, right? So if they have a disaster, they can use the product for that, and then they can repurpose it for homelessness response, because every city has homelessness. And they can go back between the two as needed, right? So we're starting to see some higher adoption in that flexibility because there's a housing shortage across the country.
You can hear in Amy's voice that while she's frustrated by diminishing government support for efforts like hers, she is determined to keep working. And her mom gave her a great optimistic aphorism when she said, "Things always get worse before they get better." Amy's optimism is key to her successful entrepreneurship, and here we can also see that she's a great listener. We might first think that all that people living on the streets need is shelter, but what about taking care of their pets and any other important things they might be giving up when they move into this new setting? Amy heard this and she responded. Now, back to my final segment with Amy King. Something I learned getting ready to talk to you is also in disaster relief. I hadn't thought about this, but there's often a need for shelter of the relief workers. They come in from out of state. I've known people who have gone, across the country into foreign countries for the Red Cross. They've got to find a place to stay. And I imagine it's expensive to find a hotel if there are rooms, because in a disaster, so it seems to me too, that it sounds like that's an opportunity for you too, in a way that a lot of people might not think of.
For sure. That's something we've been trying to talk about and get communities to understand and adopt for some time. Hotel rooms are known and easier, but they're way more expensive. So when you think about the Maui wildfires, for example, we spent
Hawaii hotel.
Yeah, we spent I think I heard a number of like $20 to $30 million a day for hotel rooms, which is wild. Like for $20 to $30 million, they could have housed everybody for a one-time cost in pallet shelters and then use those for homelessness, because Hawaii is one of the highest per capita homeless populations as well. So either way, what was done is done. But I think that there's the hotel piece, but there's also this idea of economic viability, where you want the residents of this place to get priority for what's there so that they stay in the community. If you have an entire community, like with Hurricane Katrina, that you vacate to cities that are, 2, 3, 4 hours away, they're there for a year while they're waiting to come back, or whatever the timeline is. They might get a job, they're building relationships, they're maybe staying with family and realizing they want to live with family long term, whatever it might be. You've now lost your economic basis for that community. And cities don't want that. So keep your economic basis close to home to engage in recovery together as a community. Take the relief workers, put them in temporary companies, or if you're going to bus somebody, bus them. But when you think about it, I've been working all day, like working a house for someone, and then I have to sit on a bus for 3 hours to go to a hotel room. I'm probably not going to volunteer in the future, right? So we just need to get smarter about using the resources we have and making that a viable solution over what we're used to, right? And hotel rooms are great, but in some of these communities, especially coastal communities, you only have so many.
So in terms of driving your hope and your optimism around these tough issues, I'd like to talk about the individuals you serve and the individuals, in many cases, whom you employ. Because I imagine, and I interviewed another gentleman who's written a book about encouraging companies to hire people coming out of incarceration. And while it can be a challenge, to just get back into society, let alone a job, what they're finding, what he's finding in his research is that incredibly loyal employees who have been through such hardships that a 9-to-5 job isn't so tough. I'd love to hear from you, from the people you've hired and the people you serve that you're helping pull out of homelessness. What kind of hope and optimism do you get from just seeing these opportunities come to people who have had such hardships in their lives?
Yeah, this is my favorite part of this work. I started the company because I wanted to create jobs for people who needed our community. Um, and I've had the privilege of leading teams at huge hospitals, hundreds of people on my teams who I loved and were amazing. But I have never had employees like the folks who work with us at Pallet. These are folks who have something to prove to themselves, to society, to each other. They are very purpose driven. They're very intentional. They want to give back. And so, the work we're going to do and the mission that we have is really a beautiful thing. Whenever I feel overwhelmed by this crisis and the size and scope of it, I go and walk the floor, our production floor, and I talk to people who work here. And it helps to really ground me to hear what's happening in their lives. And just as a couple examples, I mean, we have who've worked with us who used to shoot heroin in their car, were homeless for decades. Now they have construction skill sets. Some of them have gone on to start their own companies, and we've helped them do that. They've gone on to work in the union. They work for Boeing. They work for major construction companies. They're getting married. They're having children. They're regaining custody of their children who they lost while they were incarcerated. And if you think about that, when you see families reunited, and this one is the biggest one for me, like a child who loses a parent to incarceration or homelessness or addiction, you can bring in, Boys and Girls Club and a mentor, and that's great. That person, that parent is still their hero. And they're still looking to that person. And so as we watch adults rehabilitate, we see children's lives change in a way that is like the most beautiful, meaningful thing I've ever seen. And if you go back to the beginning of my career, right, working with kids, super important. I never realized how important it was to rehabilitate the parents of those kids, the grandparents of those kids, the family members, for a child to see a parent recover, release from prison and change their life, regain self-sufficiency and show them how to overcome adversity. That will go a million times farther than a mentor can provide in a child. And so that of watching those families reunite, watching parents get their kids back when it's, with people who work here. I get parents tell me all the time, they're like, my child was in juvenile and all these things. Now they're working, they're doing great. I'm so grateful for what they've been able to do with their life. And it's all that. We just give them an opportunity and they take it and they run with it. And it's not a perfect system. People fail. We have recidivism here, but it's very minimal because it's a supportive environment of peer support, and it's wildly successful because of that.
That's amazing. Yeah, you just opened my eyes to the idea of helping rehabilitate someone coming out of prison, what it does for their entire family, especially their children. I mean, that if that doesn't touch you, I don't know what will. That's remarkable. So people listening to this, everybody is either personally impacted or sees homelessness in their community. Many have probably been impacted by natural disasters. If they want to get involved with you, if they want to encourage their local service providers to learn more about Pallet, what do you recommend? What's the best way for people to do it? Because I'm sure people are going to listen to this and think, why the heck isn't my community engaging with Amy King and the good folks at Pallet?
Yeah, thank you. So they can reach out to us through our website. If you go to palletshelter.com, we have a couple different forms there where people can engage with us or just send us an email at info@palletshelter.com. We actually often work with community constituents who will come to us and say, look, I have no authority in my community, but I'm an interested party. I want the people on our streets to receive the help that I think they deserve. How can I support? And oftentimes having a local constituent engage with us, that helps our political conversations. It helps us understand the community better and who the stakeholders are. So if people want to engage with us, they can send us a message. The team will reach out to them and we can partner with them to figure out how we can support in their neighborhood.
Well, amazing. I encourage everyone to look into this. And I am so glad that our mutual friend Howard introduced us. You're a real inspiration, and I know how busy you are. And I appreciate you taking this time. And I hope that spreading the word about what you do both inspires people in their own lives, but then also inspires them to get to work with you, because you're really going to make a difference with this. So thank you so much, Amy, for your time and everything that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you.
It's pretty amazing to hear Amy King say that her favorite part of her work is seeing people get back on their feet. And I was particularly struck by her pointing out that while mentors and other supports are great, there's an even more powerful positive impact created when kids get to see their own parents recover and rebuild their lives. So as we wrap up, I hope you're glad you made the effort to listen to our more challenging than usual audio, and that you enjoyed this blue sky conversation with Amy King. Before you go, please leave us a rating or review. And if you enjoy these episodes, tell a friend and spread the word. My thanks go to Crush Graphics, designer of all graphics and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute. Be sure to spell Crush with a K so you can see more of their work at crushgraphics.com. And to Sound On, Sound Off, the amazing team responsible for editing and mixing the Blue Sky episodes. You can learn more about them at soundonsoundoff.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.